And
so
demand.
It's a huge.
And demand. The, NCLR has been working with other civil rights organizations on opening up the Common Core standards to communities and parents and telling them about it. And it's fascinating how quickly the community responds and says, tell us more about that. What should we be asking in our schools? Common Core standards is not an abstract concept to parents and communities. It is something that is real to them once they find out their kids aren't getting what other kids are getting. And this gives them the opportunity to get it. They want to know more about it, and they want to go make sure their kids have it.
Right. And with the Common Core standards, there are the theory of change there is that when you teach in that Common Core, then all folks will rise to that. But we still may have some communities that are not performing as well. Like now, we
If you don't have the
African-American
supports.
African-American young boys are not doing as well as others. When you try to have that conversation in policy and when you try to have that conversation in philanthropy, trying to segregate a community and think about their interventions differently becomes a challenge. Any comments there, and especially as we look to move towards Common Core standards?
One of the reasons it is a challenge is because we're looking at it, again, through our researcher, through our funder, through our policymaker lens, rather than asking the community, why do you think this is? As you look around your neighborhood, why are those boys not performing as well as the other kids in the high school? What's happening in them? What's happening in their lives? And we haven't involved that voice in figuring out how we get to that and then create the policy.
Right. Wow, that's interesting. Yeah. I'm sorry. As you can tell, I have a bias towards this. Katie, did you want to weigh in before we get to Chris?
That's fine.
Okay.
There are a group of funders who have, for a long time, been funding what we call education organizing and youth organizing, placing a demand on schools. And it's interesting to hear you talk about it because this is, I think, one of the challenges in communities. And I don't think this is what you meant, but if you could just open it up a little bit. So there's a lot of people in schools and a lot of people in education who want the community to come and get engaged with them. They seem to be far less interested than them being engaged with the community. And I think that's one of the differences in advocacy. It's one of the differences is involvement versus organizing. And so I just wonder if you'd like to speak about that a little bit, like how schools partner with communities, not just the communities running around to do what the schools are asking for and wanting them to do. Because I think it gets to what one of you said earlier about really who has expertise and on what. And communities have a lot of expertise to bring to the table. And then I just, while I'm up here, I just want to say, anybody who's interested in learning more about education organizing should look for Lee Christian Parker, who is now chairing the working group on education organizing.
I think two things. I think Bell Multicultural is a good example of the school reaching out to the community. As I said earlier, John and I had a conversation about what a dangerous school and neighborhood Bell was early 90s. One of the ways they got past that is by looking to the community, to community leaders and partnering with organizations in the community who knew the kids, who saw the kids every day on the streets, with the Latin American Youth Center, with other groups like that, and listening to them about what should be happening in the school, what kinds of programs the kids needed, how they partnered together to do it. So it is about reaching out to the community and creating those partnerships and saying as a school, we don't know how to do this, tell us, you're here. I think the other thing I wanted to say is that organizing, in some ways, education organizing, has not been as effective or has not had the impact that we've wanted because we haven't been using the same vocabularies. And part of what I think is incumbent upon us as educators is to provide or to let parents know what the vocabulary is and to give them the code. There is a lot of parent support that can come about when they understand what the code is in school, especially for immigrant parents who not only don't understand the code, don't understand the school culture. And I think supporting them by providing that information gives them a whole key that they haven't been able to use before, and I think it multiplies the impact of education organizing.
Yeah, let me just add on that a little bit and build on what Sherece said earlier. There are essentially two problems. One is we don't talk honestly and regularly about the problems that the data tells us exist. And frankly, it's not just a black boy problem, it's a Latino boy problem, it's a white boy problem, it's an Asian boy problem. We got a serious boy problem in terms of especially attainment, and we're not talking honestly about it. If we did that, we might get over the second problem, which is looking for help from wherever we can get it. You gotta acknowledge you got a problem first, and we're still too busy talking about girls in science to actually talk about boys who are having problems across the board. But if we acknowledge the problem, we have to also acknowledge we don't know what the heck is going on, and parents and boys themselves could probably tell us a lot more about what's going on. So if we actually were engaged in trying to look at the data and solve that problem, we'd be more likely to do the kind of honest reaching out, not just because we think we have to have 3 parent meetings a year, but because we actually need help to solve this problem before the whole thing explodes in our faces.
Absolutely.
I'll be quick. I have two quick questions. Joe Scantlebury from the Gates Foundation. One, I'm just curious what you would say to funders in this room and beyond this room who basically hear your challenge to diversify staff, to be inclusive of CBOs who are closer to the community, et cetera, but who at the end of the day are going to go with the people they know. Harvard Ed School, Stanford, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to go with the people we know. That's who we're going to fund. That's what we do. And we like those people. They talk well to us. They don't insult us. They don't hurt our feelings. And it's all good. It's all gravy. So I'm just curious what you would say to funders who have that disposition and who don't have the courage to take a chance on a new relationship and to move past, and to diversify the work. And Dr. West, will you marry me? Katie and Delia, you can go first while she thinks about that.
Yeah.
I want the answer.
Well, he already knows the answer. He's being silly. The answer is yes to that one.
And he already also knows the answer as to what I would do. And what we have done. I think, it's incumbent upon us to talk to foundations about what they don't know as well as what we know. And if we're not doing that, we're lazy and we're not fulfilling our part of the philanthropic partnership. You have existed for many years and have been successful for many years funding the people you funded. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And so I would say my part is to talk to you and tell you what you don't know. I think your role in this is to be open to my questions and to be open to my point, I say my in the royal my point of view, and to not only to take that chance, but as you're taking that chance, hold those new people as accountable as you've held other people. And while you're doing that, give them the same breaks you've given other people. That's what I would say.
The answer is yes.
I don't know. Could I actually respond, though, Joe, to... It's not the question you asked her, but the other question. And that is, look at what happened in Washington, D.C.
Oh, so no question.
Look at what happened last week in Denver. Look at what happened in Philadelphia some years ago when the superintendent tried to close the worst schools in the district. How many more times do we have to be taught this lesson? If we want to really succeed at education reform, we have to figure this out. This is not an optional strategy. This is a must-do.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, we have our call to action in several areas, and I also want to, several areas, right? Also want to draw your attention to the NCRP report that was released this week that also provides a call to action for all of us that is consistent with what we talked about here on this panel. And that is that in terms of higher ed, I love your call to action when you said to spread sunshine on the data, which I think is vitally important. I know that helped us at the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation quite a bit when we were able to present that data and talk to our board members who initially would, if you would say someone of color or a group of color or immigrants, and then they'd go into, well, so are white kids experiencing the same thing. But when you saw the stark reality and that if it continued, we really would have some gaps, we began to change behavior at the foundation. Public pressure, and that is creating the demand for our higher ed systems to change and supporting those, funding best practices and approaches to supporting those in higher ed would help us with that data. So that's what I heard in terms of the call to action with higher ed, and not that it's separate from that call to action with K through 12, which is to absolutely include voices in the conversations, to scale up the wonderful work that we have been funding, to not only take the best practice approach to it, but also to scale it up in terms of its policy implications, and also to examine equity and the community, and how we as funders can ensure that there's a fit with the civil rights work, the equity work, and our community-based work to ensure that it's all integrated and it fits in. So I believe we do have our 6 calls to action in addition to what NCRP provided for us. But the main thing is that we leave this session and this conference hearing this call to action, but actually making a change so that when we're back here in the next 5 years, we aren't lamenting about the same statistics. We actually, as philanthropy and philanthropists, can make an impact. And that impact has to be about systemic change, systemic reform, and stepping out of the box, as my fiance has said, in terms of those non-traditional folks and CBOs and universities, and engaging them on this conversation. Because this urgency is a fierce urgency. If we don't, we will just continue to perpetuate the inequities and the structure that has not done well by all communities in this country. So with that, I will close and turn it over to Chris.